want to take a minute to introduce yourself to the rest of the guests?
Oh, sure. My name's Joe Merando. I'm the CIO of the Jerde Partnership, architecture firm.
Thank you, Joe. It's such a pleasure having you with us here on the call today. Mr. Jonathan Powell. Good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning. I'm a network administrator at SWA Group. We just kind of got picked up into the IronOrbit thing. So first time here, just looking forward to seeing what we have to discuss.
Excellent. Good to have you on board here. Thank you, Jonathan, for joining. We have Mr. David Palanuk. Morning, David.
Good morning, Ayman. Yeah, my name's Dave Palanuk. I'm an account manager at Crowdstrike. Alec and I work closely together, and I'm responsible for supporting existing customers on our Crowdstrike Falcon platform. We're very focused on our customer success. So I do regular quarterly check-in calls with accounts and just make sure everything's going smoothly so they're getting the full value out of their subscriptions with us.
Awesome, perfect. Thank you, Dave. Thank you for joining as well. I'd like to bring to everybody's attention that we usually record these sessions, obviously, and we share the recordings afterwards with you, as well as we kind of take some of the highlights of the sessions that we record over here, and you go ahead and share it on the social platforms, specifically with the valuable feedback that we get on these sessions. So it's always good to share with others as well. Kicking off today's session and just to introduce, honestly, it's such an overwhelming kind of topic to talk about. So what better way to talk about this topic or start our discussion today, but just look at some of the facts or the numbers over here. For instance, if we look at the ransomware attacks that happened in 2018, we see that specifically in 2018, ransomware attacks have grew worldwide by 380%. The damages of that ransomware attack, 380% increase or surge in ransomware attacks in 2018 has summoned to somewhere around $8 billion US. Now, we thought back then that was incredibly high or large or big, but 2019 came in and then that damage grew up to $11.5 billion in 2019 alone. And so far in 2021, well, we're at $20 billion 6 months into the year. Damages caused by cybersecurity attacks and ransomware attacks so far is recorded at $20 billion. That's 57% what it was in 2015. 57%. Excuse me, 57%. If anything, the cyber threats is a national crisis. It is a crisis. There's no doubt about it. I'm sure all of you have heard of the surge of ransomware attacks and data breaches that have been happening lately. Everything from enterprise breaches to small companies and even shutting down infrastructure systems. I mean, a major gas pipeline, government agencies, and one of the world's top meat producers. This has grew up to the point where the first office in the country, the office of the president had an open letter and an executive order, actually. The open letter came from the National Security Advisor, Ann Neuberger, and executive order actually signaled a shift to a proactive stance rather than just sitting back there and waiting for these ransomware attacks to happen on these companies. With primary takeaways, pushing to the cloud, assessing vulnerabilities, and rapid response to these attacks when they happened. Now, aside of that executive order and the importance of this, that executive order came out. The news went out and was cascaded down to different companies and industries around the country. And what happened next? Well, in what experts are calling the largest ransomware attack ever, a massive cyber attack timed to coincide with the 4th of July weekend, just locked up entire IT systems of almost 3,500 businesses worldwide. 3,500 in a matter of hours. And this just happened this past weekend. Well, the attack targeted Europe primarily. It started initially in Europe, and then it quickly expanded to cover the United States. It started by targeting the Windows desktop servers, kind of deployments at 53%, and then it moved to the Android and the mobile space out there, almost added up to around 45%. This is the very first time such a drastic readjustment happened during the attack itself. So this was no longer a set and forget kind of attack anymore. The perpetrators were actually actively monitoring their performance and making decisions as the campaign unfolded and rolled out. Looks like we're moving, into a completely new age when it comes to the complexity of these cyber threats and attacks and the way they are orchestrated or ran. The punchline, unfortunately, for the subscription economy is the arrival of ransomware as a service. Unfortunately, now even novice cyber criminals or novice cyber criminals can run successful campaigns, unfortunately. In this kind of climate and this kind of environment out there, everybody asks himself, we ask ourselves, how secure are we? How confident are we with the current level of cybersecurity that our organizations, our companies are having right now? And, we probably go to bed at night asking ourselves, are we secure enough? So I'd like to open the floor for discussions today with this particular question. How confident you feel about the security of your environment and of your organization out there? Why don't we go and ask this to Joe? Joe, what do you think?
Well, I mean, no one's ever 100%, right? And, in an AEC world where, you're dealing with a lot of unstructured data and people are working from home, you're forced into some situations that you would rather not be in as a IT manager. So, yeah, 100% is just not attainable.
That is correct, 100%. I'll take 95% any given day, honestly, to be honest. So Holly, how about you guys? What do you feel? Are you getting enough sleep at night, thinking that you're safe enough or secure enough?
No, not quite. Because the nature of as Joe is mentioning, the remote work and the infrastructure that we had set up, the end user, both the end users and the end user devices right now, I feel like I'd like those to be a little more secure. And then we need to still implement multi-factor. So on our IronOrbit interface, which we're in the process of doing, but I'll sleep better when we get multi-factor and a few other things in place.
Yeah, 2FA definitely provides an added layer of security, I believe.
So I wanted to, do you mind if I chime in?
Sure, go ahead, Alec.
I was just going to comment on the remote workforce kind of comment that you made there. So just from my perspective, like as this pandemic started and as everybody kind of moved to the remote workforce a lot more, that was one thing that I saw a ton of, and that would really like spurred a lot of incident response engagements for me personally. And I mostly just wanted to comment on the idea of like as people work from home, your risk profile expands so much, right? Instead of having to work with one network and one attack surface that you can completely control inside of that one network, you now start to contact all these other machines that are at home and in different environments, and you sort of expand from one network to like 500 networks or 700 networks or whatever it might be. And I just kind of wanted to echo what you had said there. Just from my perspective, it's been a real challenge for a lot of people to feel totally secure in that as things are changing in that regard as well. And it doesn't really seem to be that things are going back the way that it used to be to a single, corporate network you could completely control. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of double click on that idea because doing something that can protect that expanding risk profile has been a challenge for a lot of companies that I've just interacted with personally. So anyway, you can go ahead and continue, Ayman. I just wanted to double click on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think, you brought a very important, aspect of the discussion, which is pretty much the attack vector. How do you control the attack vector when you have people working from everywhere right now, and you have, mobility, and you have devices logging in and being utilized on your network? So how do you keep a good track of what's going on in every terminal on the edge out there?
There's a couple of things that you have to do. It's hard to nail down a silver bullet, I would say, at least from the CrowdStrike perspective, from the CrowdStrike lens. Now, keep in mind, like I am I'm one guy. I'm still learning a lot. I try to learn as much as I can from every engagement that I do. And I am looking through the lens of Crowdstrike. So keep that in mind, right? I just want to be honest with you all here. But one of the things that Crowdstrike does in particular is, as a part of our kind of greater solution, we deploy something that we call Discover. That's the name of the solution. But essentially what it is it will, the machines that you deploy our antivirus to, it will detect if machines that are neighbors actually have a solution deployed as well. And so basically from that, it does what, if there's anybody technical in the room, it does an ARP table lookup. So the sensor that's on that machine that's deployed, it'll say, okay, who are my neighbors? Who do I have in the environment here? It'll collect MAC addresses, IP addresses from that essentially and say, okay, can we reference that back against a known deployed agent, a deployed sensor? And it'll say, no, if we don't have that known MAC address with the deployed agent, then we can make a pretty good assumption that there's no solution deployed there. It'll also let you know about things like, and again, I don't want it to turn into really a sales pitch at the moment. This is more about the threat landscape and kind of what we do to solve it. But it will tell you about things that you can't deploy with a particular security solution. So it will tell you, say, okay, I've got this Roku in my environment, or a smart TV, or something of that nature, where you might find, wow, I can't even deploy a security solution to this thing. It doesn't actually have an operating system. And it may help you think to yourself, well, maybe we don't need those devices in the network or something of that nature. So I think that's part of it. Visibility is really the kind of, to answer the question, is visibility on more of the network. What do you have deployed? What do you not? What can you protect and what can you not?
Yeah, but then again, you got the budget, the budget perspective again to consider, and then we all know that security is not cheap. If anything, it's probably the most expensive item on the list over here when you're considering your IT expenditures.
Mm-hmm.
How do you control? How do you kind of deploy a secure enough environment, and when you're dealing with a limited budget? I mean, that's a very, very good question actually to raise over here, specifically for you, ladies and gentlemen, who are running and leading these organizations. How do you work around these budgets? From my background area, I remember that security always used to fall behind when it comes to expenditures against other projects or against other initiatives that we've had. But I mean, nowadays, I don't think you can take the risk anymore, or you can even, it's not even for discussion anymore. So how do you control this? How do you manage to put up a good secure environment and remain within your budget?
Especially for organizations that maybe haven't experienced the compromise or experienced the data breach yet. And it's something that I do have to think about a lot, which is like, for a company that hasn't experienced that pain yet, how do you sort of get the opportunity to go and secure budget for that without having it to be sort of like pulling teeth a lot of the time? And one way CrowdStrike gives this opportunity to customers is to package up as much as we can into a single agent as possible. So you can acquire sort of one platform from CrowdStrike, for example. There's other vendors that do this as well, but for CrowdStrike, we package up as much as we can under the same agent and have it be a cloud architected solution so that you can have sort of modules on the back end, right? So you can turn on or off what you need or not need, but still have the same agent deployed. And then you just have to acquire one platform, and as you expand capability and need from there, you can, sort of scale the solution without having to deploy additional sensors. Making something scalable in that nature by just deploying one agent is pretty useful. From my perspective as well, something that we do at CrowdStrike, the name of it is called Falcon Complete. That's one of the solutions that I personally interact with a lot. And what we do is we essentially provide 3 fundamental pillars of any good security posture. One is going to be technology, prevention, detection, better visibility, and so on, these types of things. The second one would be professional analysts to run the program. And then the third pillar would be sort of a formalized process around incident handling or sort of procedure. I often, interact with organizations that, there's a little background on this too. This is kind of spurring a couple of additional thoughts for me as well. every time I field an IR engagement, every time I pick up the inbound line, somebody's asking for help and they're looking for the right path forward, they always have something deployed. They always have some solution out there deployed, an AV solution or something like that, right? And so it's very indicative to me that a lot of the threat landscape is able to evade prevention or detection of data technology altogether. And so there's certainly a clear need there, I think, to supplement technology in additional ways, like people, like formalized process and things of that nature as well. And that's the other two fundamental pillars that we try to bring into the equation under Falcon Complete, which is, let's give you a technology, let's give you the right people to handle that technology, manage it, maintain it, do the incident response work and things like that, and then build out a formalized process as well. Oftentimes I'll ask the question, actually I'll pose the question out to you guys here. If anybody wants to chime in, feel free. Does anybody here have a formally documented incident handling playbook or plan as of today? Anybody?
That's a challenge by itself, because I don't know what kind of playbook will hold up for all the changes that are happening. It's pretty much fluid and dynamic. Every day there's a new vulnerability. Every day there's a new approach. It's a very challenging one. So
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's one of the questions that we were actually addressing internally in IronOrbit and running our business and providing our services to our customers, which is how do you cope with the ever increasing threats and changes and the fluidity of the situation in general, right? And how do you keep your playbook up to where it needs to be, and where do you have, other specifically to the customers that have specific compliances required? Take NIST as an example, and lots of customers actually need to be compliant with what NIST 800-171 requires. So it becomes even more challenging when we're working with organizations like the government or with the federal government in particular. It becomes even more and more, because you need to pay attention for the compliances required in your incident response playbook. So it becomes even more challenging. But that's actually a very good question. Do you know that in the Gartner report that was released in 2019, actually, they reported that the construction industry is the third highest industry targeted by ransomware, unfortunately. The construction. Now, that report hasn't been updated since, I haven't seen any newer information around if these industries have been shuffled or not. Government was the first, manufacturing was the second, and construction was the third. So I'm assuming that, this trend is actually, if anything, is expanding and moving forward. And now I believe that even more and more regulations are going to come down to specifically require or ask these industries to be in compliance to how do they respond, or how do they actually deal with these ransomware attacks or threats. And this actually brings me to my next question over here is, do you expect or anticipate any more security regulations to emerge in the AEC industry, given that this industry is on the top 5 industries being hit right now with the ransomware attacks? And that's actually an open question. Let's actually go to Jonathan. Jonathan, have you been asked to have any compliance regulations in place at your organization? Have you guys been having to abide to certain compliances?
Not that I know of.
And how about with your incident response so far processes? Did they have to be in compliance with any of the regulations out there?
No, they didn't, as far as I know. We were given recommendations a number of times from consultants and whatnot, right? But it didn't really fit our business model or structure.
Yeah.
And then going back, just wasn't large enough to need one of these huge compliance-based scenario solutions.
And going back to the 5 best practices that came down as part of the president's executive order, these 5 best practices were listed as backup data and keep it offline, number 1. Number 2, update and patch systems promptly. Number 3, test incident response plan, which we're just talking about, right? The incident response. Number 4, check your security teams at work. And then number 5, segment your networks. Now, you being a network specialist, Jonathan, so when they say segment your networks, what are exactly the measures that you would take or put in place?
Oh, that's not an easy answer, right? Because it's like every single situation's different. It's kind of like we have multiple sites and we separate each site, so they can't really directly talk to each other. You know, so we segment each office from each other to some degree. You know,
And
we have
doesn't
our
that
offline backups and everything. I think that's probably the most important part of this whole thing, is just like being able to recover quickly. They're gonna get you at some point, no matter what you do. You know, so you need to make sure that you can recover as quickly as possible. I think that's the only option we really have at this point, other than spending billions of dollars over time to eventually get hacked.
But Jonathan, trying to deploy such measures in place, doesn't that also add a burden on the costs? And again, going back to your budgets and how do you work around these budgets?
Sure, but like, I mean, isn't that an easier number to come to based on like, okay, you lost everything, you know? Like eventually, that's an eventuality, right? Like, so then you have your insurance and everything that you have to go through, and you know, like I think, I don't know.
So if I could add a thought there as well, I tend to agree with you a bit, in a sense, because it is very, very hard to prevent compromise. And something that I see personally just at CrowdStrike is I see compromise happen a lot of the time. You know, intrusion or something of that nature, an adversary maybe, you know, setting up persistence in a network, gaining a good foothold, trying to spread laterally. They do a few of these things before they actually start to go to their goal of like data exfiltration, encryption, corruption, or destruction, you know, something like that. That's usually what I see as being kind of the primary goals, and where people end up having these legal obligations for like forensic reporting, or, you know, notifying a law firm, law enforcement, clients, things like that. What we've tried to do at CrowdStrike is give customers the ability to, even if compromise does happen, even if technologies are evaded, like an antivirus or something like that, because these antivirus solutions, they're not perfect. Even if that compromise does happen, if you have a formalized incident handling process in place, and you're able to sort of respond to a detection or something like that very quickly, and reverse the compromise before the adversary gets to the point of exfiltration, encryption, corruption, or something like that, you can often produce a really great outcome, at least from my perspective. It's something we've done with Falcon Complete at CrowdStrike. Essentially, so like, even if there is a compromise, even if artifacts do make it onto the machine, we'll intervene before the adversary can sort of get to the point of doing their ultimate goal, remove them from the environment, and then report on it, of course, as well. And it's something we've actually backed with a warranty as well. Like AIG will evaluate CrowdStrike and say, okay, you know, you're able to perform this outcome consistently time and time again. We're willing to eat up this underwriting fee you pay us in exchange for the risk of your customers. We've actually never had a claim on that warranty to date. We've never had a breach to date under Falcon Complete. So if you're able to intervene against compromise, I often think you can prevent data breach in many cases.
So Alec, you're talking about the products here and services that needs to be in place to protect an organization. And I believe me and you had this conversation when we were preparing it for this particular session. You want to go ahead and share with us these products that you think are necessary, you know, to be in place to protect, and how do they fall into the approach that you guys follow at CrowdStrike?
Yeah, again, there's a lot out there. I really encourage people to do their research. This is the lens of CrowdStrike, and this is what we found to be successful. And of course, I'm always willing to have these conversations around, you know, getting CrowdStrike into an environment. But again, I want you to do your research and make your own evaluation on these things. But again, I talked about the scaling nature of the threat landscape. Again, just going back to two things that I often see as I field an incident response engagement. One is evasion of technology, and the other is very fast movement time of these threats. Evasion of technology is very frequent. As I mentioned earlier, every time I pick up that inbound request for the IR, they always have something deployed. And so it's indicative to me that you've got to do something to supplement technology beyond just an AV solution. It used to be you could deploy antivirus and you could stop a lot of what is out there. And a lot of the modern threats, they're just a bit more evasive. They're a little bit more low and slow. And they really like to use trusted applications. Like if you're a Windows shop, you're definitely familiar with PowerShell. You know, if you're a Linux shop, you're probably familiar with Bash or the Unix command line. These things are really, really useful tools for a lot of these adversaries, and they avoid a lot of antivirus solutions. So it's definitely something to think about there, being able to detect those a little bit more evasive threats. In addition to that, I wanted to talk about as well the time it takes oftentimes for these adversaries to accomplish their goals. CrowdStrike started as a threat intelligence company. We track about 155 different adversaries today in a threat intelligence feed, and then we developed technology from there to essentially combat whatever adversaries we came across. We also started as an incident response company. There's 2 to 4 hours of breakout time. That's what you see there. Breakout time is, again, time it takes for an adversary to sort of gain access, set up persistence, move laterally, start gaining their objective, start accomplishing an objective, which is data exfiltration, encryption, corruption, or destruction, typically. What I see, what CrowdStrike sees is often the time it takes to respond and remediate these threats is 162 hours. And these stats for us come from proactive exercises we do, like red team, blue team engagements. We do something called adversary emulation as well, where we'll look at your organization and say, okay, what's the most likely adversary to essentially take a look at you? And we're going to use the same techniques, tactics, procedures that they might use against you in a test. And then also, post-incident reporting is often pretty illustrative in this sense as well. And so it's no assumption of what you guys are capable out there, but I want you to think about, if it's 2 a.m. on Saturday and you discover a threat, what's going to be the time for investigation, the remediation effort? Clean systems are moving forward back to a revenue-driving state and reporting on that situation. And really what we want to do is crunch this down to under 2 hours, ideally 1 hour, if at all possible. And so that's one of the big drivers for CrowdStrike, and something we strive to do under this Falcon Complete solution is under 1 hour remediation time, whether it be commodity adware or zero-day nation-state exploit. And so it leads to kind of the next part of the conversation, which is to achieve a quality security posture. I really urge anybody out there that's listening to this to move away from the idea of acquire 20 or 10 different technologies, deploy them, and cross your fingers that they'll actually work. You really want to get some expertise involved. You want to get a formalized process around your security posture as well. And so this is what we strive to do at CrowdStrike, which is get some human engagement with the technology that we deploy. Prevention, detection, the visibility element is important. But we have a team at CrowdStrike that will actually manage the solution on your behalf, configure, tune, do all the human responsibilities behind it on a 24/7 basis, and sort of enforce everything that technology does. Because again, we do see these technologies fail, and CrowdStrike does quite a bit to stop them from failing, act as a safety net for our own technology. And so this is the format that CrowdStrike would like to see a lot of security postures go, which is a side of technology for prevention, for the detection, as I've said, better visibility, 2 human teams at very least, 1 for threat hunting, 1 for sort of response and remediation, and then a formalized process around it. Like I said, incident handling playbook is something you want to draft so that you can, every time a threat pops up, you see a detection, you can get from that detection to clean system every single time, consistently, no matter what the asset is, whether it's a critical production server or if it's a HR laptop or something of that nature, right? The threats will take different forms, and these different asset groups will have different kind of appetites for interruption or risk or something like that.
I was just wondering if anybody on this call is using CrowdStrike currently.
Yeah, we do. At Sasaki.
Okay. And it does everything you say as it does, or you haven't tested yet because you haven't got hit?
We haven't tested yet, and I'm not the expert in it, so I'm happy to connect you with the folks who do on our staff work on it. But yeah, so we haven't really had it tested yet.
Right on.
So if I am to add as well, Jonathan, we do also use CrowdStrike over here. It's our de facto go-to solution for EDR and GAV, next generation antivirus, for all of our customers, whether they're a managed services customer or a shared environment kind of shared domain customer, or even an isolated infrastructure as a service customer. So we do use CrowdStrike. We did not use them before specifically for our managed services customers. Well, I can tell you one thing. Right before the 4th of July break, which is pretty much this last weekend, we kind of anticipated that there could be another wave of attacks. So we went ahead and we kind of enabled it for pretty much every single managed services customer that we serve and support. And I can tell you we couldn't be happier sitting and monitoring what happened over the weekend with the amount of vulnerabilities that were captured. By CrowdStrike, Falcon Complete. We're very happy. If these vulnerabilities were exploited, if the Falcon Complete was not in place, things would have been not as good to some of our customers. There was a lot of threats coming in, and these were captured by CrowdStrike. So we're really happy. Seriously, I was reviewing. I mean, our CEO was sharing with me. He was like, "You see, it was the right move. To go ahead and just proactively deploy it for our managed services customers." I couldn't be happier because it's crazy. It's crazy. So we also use them. We're very, very happy with the outcome so far.
Yeah, I do. I can certainly appreciate the question as well, which is like, does it work? Right? Like, is it actually going to get the job done right as well? And so, I appreciate the kind words there as well, Ayman. But I was also going to mention there's a lot of great third-party validation out there from vendors like Forrester, Gartner, the third-party kind of juggernaut, evaluation firms. I definitely encourage you you take a look at it from that perspective. And then we also, CrowdStrike does offer a trial of its antivirus, and I highly encourage our customers to go out there and really put it to the test. I see a lot of customers go out and grab something like Metasploit or a tool like Crowdstrike, right? And you can run a lot of pretty interesting exploits. Something that's a little bit different from the usual against our own solution, and test it out for yourself as well.
So Alec, when we say that 95% is Gartner reports, and 95% of security breaches are caused by human error, right? And that stopping breaches actually requires more than just technology. So how do you explain this? I'm not a security expert, so what does that mean?
Human error? The
Yep.
question for human error? Yeah, so from my perspective, a lot of what is causing the problem, there's users compromising themselves. And one of the main vectors for breach that I see personally is spear phishing, either the attachment or the link in the email. It's very, very common. So clicking the link, right? Not having the knowledge to see that this email that's come across is a little bit bogus, if you will, or from an unusual place. Opening attachments and opening links is just something you want to be pretty careful with. And it's also kind of a catalyst as well to pair something like a CrowdStrike with a good email filter as well that can recognize those types of threats coming in. I would say, so from the user error standpoint, when people use something like KnowBe4 or one of these like phishing test services, that's what they're looking to resolve, is make sure their users know not to click the link, not to open the email attachment or something of that nature. So hopefully that begins to answer the question there.
Question here to the guests: how frequent do you guys run training exercises for your employees? How frequently do you go back to your teams and you ask everyone in your organizations to follow specific procedures or measures, and do they always work? I mean, as an example, last week we had one of our customers, one specific user on that particular customer account was trying to open the same attachment at least 5 times, and every time he was trying to open that attachment, which was a malicious kind of code, CrowdStrike tool was kicking in and just capturing it and stopping it from executing. So we reached out to this customer, and we obviously had a conversation with that particular user. But the question remains is that how frequently do you go and train these users on these policies, and do you face problems in having these people actually adopt the policies and go with it?
Yeah, we use KnowBe4, and the users never do the training. I mean, I'm thinking like if you don't have like a consequence, you're not going to get them to do training.
Yeah. Sure.
If it's just an annoyance, they're fine with that. They'll complain to you about it, complain about you. It's your fault, but they're not going to go take training, in my experience.
Yeah.
Do they actually work? I mean, do trainings work? Do they get people just a little bit more cautious about what they're doing, or they just turn on that training module and then they forget about it 5 minutes later?
This is Joe. I mean, we haven't, since pandemic, we haven't done one. But we've done them in-house. I mean, I brought people in and forced everybody to attend, and they have been helpful. Just like basic things, even like, how to manage your passwords, and, how to pick difficult passwords, and what to click, what not to click, how to identify that. And, I definitely, it has helped because I see less, and you know what, then they'll email me, if they see something questionable. So, that's all good. So yeah, definitely they help, but yeah, getting it organized is difficult.
Would you consider outsourcing that training modules to somebody who would walk in and bring these modules and just walk them through or drive them through the teams, or you think it's more efficient to keep running them in-house?
Oh no, I mean, I'd bring in somebody from the outside. Yeah, definitely.
One of the other items also that I recommended as best practices out of the 5 best practices over here is pretty much backing up your data and keeping it offline. And that's also a question to the guests here. Do you actually have any offline backup systems in place or measures taken in place? Keep your data isolated somewhere else, or is it just on the same environment or on-prem?
I mean, we have a mix. Yeah, we have a copy that's kept off, not on prem. Yeah, so
that's part of the
I utilize several different solutions. You're just trying to do as much as you can, get the best bang for the buck.
I do see what you mean. I do see what you mean. The more you go in a multi-cloud, it could become pretty much expensive when you're adopting or deploying a multi-cloud kind of setup in place. Now, obviously, I got a bunch of stats over here that I wanted to run through you guys as well. For instance, early 2020 observes a 32% increase in ransomware attacks against energy and utilities organizations. And then, less than 60% of the respondents believe that their organizations are approaching compliance with government cybersecurity mandates. And also the global market for energy, IT, and cybersecurity software and services will surpass 19 billion in 2020 and reach more than 32 billion in 2028. So the point that we're trying to make over here is that ransomware attacks are on the rise. The payments are increasing and more. Unfortunately, this past weekend only, the cumulative ransomware asked for these 3,500 plus businesses that were attacked as part of the latest wave added up to almost $70 million, right? And that actually brings us to the question, which is, how does that impact your planning, your forecasts, your budgeting moving forward when you have to worry about that? Hey, if we got hit by ransomware, we had this question whether we should pay the ransom or we should just go back and try to rebuild it or restore it all the way. Do you have any policies or regulations in place that actually, God forbid, if this happens and you got hit by a ransomware attack and your data was just non-recoverable, is that something that you would consider that you should go and pay the ransom and get going, or no, you would always have certain compliance or have certain recommendations in place not to actually pay the ransom and move on? How do you have a policy in place for day zero?
No, we don't. And I think the recommendation would change as your infrastructure matures or gets set up, or it doesn't, right? So, and it depends on how much they're asking for. So, yeah. I know, when I used to work for the government, the concept is you just pay it. It's just cheaper to pay it. But I know that if you have good infrastructure backup, it might just take you a day to be down and then you're up and it's fine. So I think it just depends. So at Sasaki, I'm not sure what we'd do right now if this happened to us, but depends on how much it would cost.
Covered, so we got you covered, so you don't really need to do much. But yeah. I know it's such a dilemma, right? So the government, some of the government agencies are just going ahead and paying the ransom, and that doesn't really help, because if you do so, you're pretty much encouraging these guys to do it more. Got a question over here. In 2019 geospatial market and the AEC industry report shows that digitalization in building infrastructure may save up to 20% of the resources, while project time savings could reach only 14%. The report goes on and say that in the AEC industry in particular, the usage of cloud-based technologies is driven by the need to adopt mobile software on job sites to perform tasks like daily field reports, accessing customer and job information, tracking employee time and approval, as well as sharing resources such as drawings, photos, and documents in general. So obviously, speaking of digitalization and speaking of the importance of digitalization, while at the same time keeping everything secure and intact, and moving to the cloud. Joe, do you guys utilize any cloud solutions right now, or are you considering any cloud solutions?
It's a mix. We keep a lot of critical data in the cloud. We have some on-prem. It's tiered. But cost is always a factor because the cloud is not cheap. So, and yes, we have requirements where we have a lot of our projects are overseas, and people will be on site. They need the data right there. So the cloud's quite helpful.
So do you feel more comfortable with workloads being on the cloud or just remaining on-prem? What makes you feel more comfortable or confident when it comes to security?
Security?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of variables there. So it would depend upon what the threat was. I would I think maybe equally as either way. I don't know. Yeah.
Because back in the days when you used to pop that question, you would have probably 9 out of 10 in the room would answer by saying that, cloud is not as secure. I'm seeing that this perception is kind of changing right now, especially with lots of cloud-based or cloud-first strategies or cloud-first tools specifically for security. Crowdstrike being one of them, actually providing cloud-based security infrastructure. So do you think that perception is changing right now? Do you think it's pretty much equal between what sits on-prem versus what's on the cloud? I mean, I personally, I'm biased. I cannot give my opinion over here. I'm all for cloud, so.
Oh, it's totally shifted. I remember the old days where all the IT managers didn't want to give up their, mail server, for Office 365. I mean, they didn't want to do it, and of course, everything shifts. So, no, I mean, I think our budgets are limited, right? So, leverage another provider, in their processes.
Did you think that the cloud is more expensive or less expensive, actually?
Than on-prem
Yep.
for everything, or just the specific service?
Let's talk. I mean, honestly, moving a workload, specific workload to the cloud versus keeping it on-prem. Taking all factors into consideration: the computing power costs, the security costs, the backup and disaster recovery costs, all these different elements that comes into the mix. So in comparing, on-prem or running on-prem workloads right now versus running the same workloads on the cloud or adopting cloud-based solutions.
It's more expensive for us so far, but we're early in our transition, so I'm not sure we figured out all the efficiencies yet, but yeah.
That's awesome. Perfect. I have a few minutes left over here. I wanted to thank you all for participating in our roundtable discussion today. We hope the information presented here makes it easier actually for your firms to navigate the month ahead. I hope they're not as tough as the weeks that just passed by. If there are any key topics that you would like to discuss, please bring them forward. If you had any questions regarding today's session or any future sessions that you would like us to actually host or run, please bring them forward. We have actually our next program happening a few weeks from now about the next topic that we're discussing this coming session. Well, there's a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill that is on the table right now being discussed. This bill calls for $580 billion in new spending over the current funding levels of transportation, water, broadband, power, environmental, resiliency, and it's all in the cloud. actually, resiliency, and it all could generate or create more than 82,000 full and part-time jobs in the AEC industry. It could generate actually a sum of 63 billion in AEC industry wages, and it could add up around 75 billion to the overall GDP. All these numbers, we're going to be discussing them on our next episode and program. The questions that we have on mind over here, why the nation's infrastructure needs a massive overhaul and trillions of dollars like the one that we have right now. What's included in the bill, what's excluded, what projects actually will be tackled first, what is the priority of the prioritization of this particular project list, and then what are the implications on the AEC industry as a whole. So all these questions, actually, we're going to try to answer them during our next episode. Meanwhile, I'd like to thank you again for joining us today.